Good afternoon, everyone,
Yeah.
and thank you for joining us. I am Kristen Knock, Senior Vice President of R&D and Programs at BioHive Diagnostics, bioMérieux, and I will be your host for the IVDR session of the Regulatory Compliance and Quality, or RCQ track.
Okay, perfect. All right.
We have a fantastic panel with us to talk about the latest in IVDR, a topic very near and dear to my heart. Before we kick off the panel, on behalf of BioFire, I just want to say how proud we are to sponsor the RCQ track and to be a part of the growing BioHive community here in Utah. Now let's get to our panel. I'm going to ask our two expert panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Alex Lan, Principal Consultant with NAMSA, followed by Anya Wiersma, the CEO of MyCE Consultancy. Alex?
Thank you very much, Kristen. I'm Alex Lan. I'm working at the moment with NAMSA for almost 3 years now. I'm working as a consultant, very much specialized in IVDR and European compliance in broader sense. And in the past, I've worked with reputable notified bodies in senior positions ranging from technical dossier reviewer, auditor, and head of certification management. And in that position, I've seen all kinds of devices and companies come by. So I'm located in the Netherlands and very much working internationally. Over to you, Anya.
Yes, well, thank you for having us here. We're from the Dutch, so we're in a different time zone, but it's always fun on a Friday evening to have a meeting and discuss IVDR. My name is Anya Wiersma. I will introduce myself later when I just start sharing slides, but Alex and I were colleagues at a notified body. And maybe also good to say that I'm also the chair of the board of the REPS Netherlands chapter, one of the European chapters. There are 3 European chapters. In US, there are more chapters, but that's also why the connection is here. And I'm very pleased that I'm invited to discuss the IVDR. Shall I then start sharing my slides in the presentation? Okay.
Yeah, wonderful. Please start.
Just have to set it up. I hope that everybody can see me. Yeah, my slides are there. I just check also there. I can see it. So the main thing is IVDR. What's happening in Europe with the IVDR? This is briefly my introduction. I'm a medical biologist by training. Did a PhD afterwards. Then worked for a pharmaceutical company for 8 years. Then I started to work at Kima Quality. Was there in medical for 6.5 years, and that's now DECRA certification. A notified body auditor, and Alex and I were actually one of the few IVD technical, or project leaders, let's say it like this. So it's very nice that we can combine now also the presentation on the IVDR. But that's a long time ago, 10 years ago, started the consultancy, and I'm a consultant for medical device manufacturers, IVD manufacturers, subcontractors of them, but I'm also still a contractor for some notified bodies. Of course, independence is very clearly controlled and regulated, let's say it like this. And the chair of the board of the REPS Netherlands chapter already for a couple of years. And actually, the REPS Netherlands chapter is very proud that next year we will have our 10th anniversary. So that will be a party if everything can be open again. That's in brief my background, and actually we were interested in who is joining us here, and if those men, if we can see it. I'm not sure if we can see it, but are there attendants for the currently of an IVD manufacturer? Can we see raise hands somewhere? I'm not sure if you can see. I'm not sure how we can see it, but the main thing is, how are you familiar with the European current directive? Are you already involved with a notified body? Do you have list A products or list B products or self-tests? Or are you all self-declared under IVDD? I'm not sure if we can see all those hands. Maybe the organizer can see it. but we were just really curious, what are our attendance? And what is your current status for your products currently? Do you have the IVDD self-declared, and are they now going into the IVDR, and what's your status on it? I'm not sure if we can see any results from it. Maybe we can see it later, but we were just interested to find that out. And for us, it's always good. We already discussed beforehand, Alex and I, what we were going to talk about. And although we can talk about a lot, and I have to be careful, so Alex will shut me up when I'm going too long and too fast. But please ask questions, because that's what we are here for. We want to have a lot of questions, and that's only helping you for that. I will continue. What's safety for the CE IVD certification process? So it's Europe. It's all about these two words, safety and performance. And it's all dealing with patient safety, that your diagnostic tests are performing as intended and safety is guaranteed. And of course, you never get 100% safe product, but the benefits should of course always outweigh the risks. This is the key topic, safety and performance. That's where the regulation is all about. That's where the directive was already all about. And that's also how notified bodies and file reviewers will look at your files and your products. And of course, the IVDR is all based on all types of products, so it's a big range. Just very quickly, what does it mean, the IVDD and the IVDR? It means access to Europe. It's CE is Conformité Européenne. And then currently we have 27 member states. So when you have an approval for the CE marking product, you access Europe for those 27 countries together with the EFTA countries. So then you are allowed to enter those countries. Unfortunately, we lost one of a very big country, and we still feel sorry about it, that UK left the European country. We consider that in Europe now as a third country, the same as US. So it's and it's also Switzerland. There's the IVDR will not be adopted there, so there will be an issue. But I will not go into talk about Brexit and Swixit. We discuss. Okay, I will give an overall small overview of what is really the most important parts of the IVDR, and then Alex will dive deeper in the most important topics, only to help you to understand what the IVDR is asking and how to get through that certification process as soon as possible. Very briefly, the regulation, it's published 2017-746. I always call it the small little brother of the MDR. They will publish together. Luckily, they have the same build-up. The IVDR consists of articles, and you have to comply to those articles. That's what you have to comply to. So those 10 chapters and the 113 articles of the IVDR, that's what you have to comply to. And here you see all those chapters. And I'm just highlighting some of those most important ones for you. The placing on the market, putting into service and economic operators. Of course, the classification part, the clinical evidence performance evaluations, that's part of Alex will dive into deeper, and the post-market surveillance as well, and vigilance. It's just in those chapters, and there's a lot of text in there. So read it carefully and use that text to show compliance with it. And if you compare the old directive with 37 pages now to 175 pages, 157 pages, sorry, that's the Dutch weird thinking. It looks like it's a lot more requirements, but actually a lot of requirements are more or less the same. There are more new requirements, but those pages are more explaining and leading you through what you have to do. So it's helping you also to be in compliance. It's not helping you, it's also helping the notified bodies, because it's now there very clearly in the text what you have to have. So the articles are leading, that's what you have to comply to. And then you have annexes. So we have 15 annexes here. And those annexes explain how you have to comply to those articles. And you will, if you read through the text of the IVDR, always nice to read that in a weekend, you will see all the articles refer to annexes and back and forth. Annex 1 is key. It's the general safety and performance requirements. So it's safety and performance requirements again. Then you see Annex 2 talks about technical documentations, and technical documentation on PMS is Annex 3. A very important one I'm just highlighting is the classification rules. Look at the classification rules for your devices because it's in Annex 8. And here you see Annex 13 is the performance evaluation, performance studies, and market performance follow-up. If you go through all those annexes, it's leading you through the compliance. And even there's the last annex is a correlation table with the old directive from 1998 to the regulations. What are the hot topics? Well, the hot topics are here. The IVDR timelines, a big issue. Changes to the classification, a big issue. PRC, but also increased requirements for clinical performance data. There are more increased data, especially for performance requested. Increased post-market surveillance. The economic operators is a key thing. There's also now a new group, the in-house testing. So the in-house developed tests are now also part of the IVDR, was not part of the IVDD, leading to a lot of issues. We have the big database, which is in development. The red ones are the ones which are the most important currently. Also, the designations of the notified body is a big hot topic. And just like with the MDR, in the IVDR, it's clearly stated there's no grandfathering anymore. So every file will be reviewed again. Every product will be reviewed again as being a brand new product. That's the requirement of the IVDR, and the notified bodies will look at those products, also older products, as being brand new, and you have to provide that evidence. A big or a slide with a lot of lines, but this is from one of the notified bodies designated. This is from Andreas Stange from TÜV Süd. Here's actually the timeline. So I will discuss the transition timelines for the IVDR. The IVDR came into force 26th of May 2017. Then the IVDR had a 5-year transition period. So a long time, 26th May 2022, only half a year left. That's not much. In the meantime, they had to set up all the requirements, because it's not only the requirements of manufacturers in there, there's also a lot of other requirements are in there. But the date of application is 26th of May 2022. And as of that, then you are, before that, you are allowed to place products on the market under the IVDD or the IVDR. And after 26th of May, officially the date of application is there. And then officially all the products have to have a CE mark through the notified body if you are in the new classification rules. There is a soft transition was possible for those products having an IVDD certificate, and those are only list A products, list B products, and self-test under the IVDD, and then they had possibility, if that certificate is valid until 24, to rely on the soft transition. However, what happened is, because of the classification rules, and a lot of people know that, I think, we can discuss it later, but there's a big transition from self-declared products, which is currently under the IVDD. There's around 80% of the IVDs, CE IVDs used and placed on the market in Europe are self-declared. There's no involvement of a notified body. They do not have a CE certificate. They only have a registration at authorities. And that switch with the classification rules goes from 80% self-declared to only 15% self-declared. And all the others, so the 85%, has to go through a notified body, through a conformity assessment routing. What happens, and especially the last year, the manufacturers, they say, will there be a delay of the date of application, or there has to be a delay of the date of application because we can't make it. We can't make it, but also the notified bodies can't make it. And how can we comply to the regulation if there is a house, and indeed the big house is there, but there's no full kitchen available? For instance, the reference labs are not assigned yet, or there's no bathroom finalized yet. So it looks like the infrastructure is not completely ready. But what do we have to do? I can only give you an advice saying, work with the IVDR to show your compliance. It's not an excuse. And it's only 6 months ahead. And the main thing is, and this is maybe a very busy slide, but this is just to show you, this is one of the slides we always present at the RAPS Netherlands chapter. Here you see in green or in purple, actually the old notified bodies designated under the IVDD, under the directive. There are some already gone. And in green, you see now the notified bodies designated for IVDR. There are only 6 at this moment, and the last 2 just joined a couple of months ago. And the 2, well, BSI Netherlands, to Zuid are producing now more certificates, not enough, but the other ones, they are starting to produce some, going into the conformity assessment routing and produce some certificates, but there's not enough time to serve all the customers they want. And the designation process is very tight for those notified bodies. There's a very strict control. And in here you see the overview of the notified bodies at each stage of the process from the European Commission. And in yellow, just look at the yellow ones, because those are the IVDRs. And you see 6, 6, 6, 6. So the end is when they're published in Nando. And you see, there you see the final CAPA received is number 7. And the other one has only had joint assessment teams. Well, Alex can tell you all the details, what happened with the designation process, but I can tell you for a notified body, it takes a long time, 2 years at least. So I expect that only this number 7 will be designated before really the date of application. And that's not enough. Then we also had a very big issue with Brexit, because that's a really issue why the UK notified bodies could not become a notified body under the IVDR. And of course, also COVID, the pandemic, caused delays in also the designation process, because they do not do the assessments. So is there a delay? Will there be a delay, or there has to be a delay? There has been a lot of discussions, and the European Commission requested all the stakeholders, I think in the beginning of this year, second quarter of this year, and notified bodies, the laboratories, the manufacturers, the big manufacturer groups, the MedTech Europe groups, they all had to provide data to show, are you really not going to make it? And based on that data and based on that discussion, there is a proposed corrigendum out. So that's hot news. We knew there were some rumors going on, but we did not know what was in there. So 14th of October 2021, the proposed corrigendum by the European Commission has been published. It's not a corrigendum yet, because the European Parliament, because it's always a trilogue in Europe, European Commission drafts the regulations, and then the European Parliament and the European Councils, consisted of all ministries of all the European countries, the 27, they independent have to have a positive voting on the text of the corrigendum. And then when it's published in the European an official journal of the European Union, then it is into force, and it is immediate into force. But it's there. And what does it say? Main thing, date of application is not delayed. It's not the same as with the MDR. The date of application stays. So 26th of May, 2022, it's really D-Day. IVDD does not exist anymore, then it's IVDR, 6 months. However, they propose adjustment in the text, and you see here the text, the most important ones, have a potential soft transition of the up-classified products, and that's a risk-based approach per classification. So they included now here that devices for which a conformity assessment procedure did not require a notified body, then you have to comply, you have to get your CE certificate, your conformity assessment for the Class Ds, the highest risk class, before 26th of May 2025. The Class Cs have now 26th of May 2026, and the Class Bs 2027. And Class A's for sterile conditions, because that's also a new group which has to go through a notified body, has the same date. That means that all those up classification products which are currently placed on the market, notified at the manufacturer, at the authorities, they may rely on a soft transition, what we call with these timelines. That helps. Class A's are not exempt. Class A's are the products which do not need a notified body for approval, just like now the current process. They have to comply as of 26th of May 2022. And the last part is always important. It's the same as with the MDR. It's clearly stating, although you may rely on a soft transition, the post-market surveillance requirements, vigilance cases, reporting, or the registrations of the operators clearly stated in here is already applicable as of May 26, 2022. So when you have currently your notified body there for all the products of list A or B products, or maybe you have an ISO 13485 certificate with a notified body, they know this and they will audit you as of 26th of May, when you have an up classification, that you have your post-market surveillance process in place. Be careful with that. I included here quickly the MDCG guidance recently published for MDR, but it will be the same for IVDR. So use that guidance, MDCG, Medical Device Coordinating Group, guidances. What is required? What should you have to be in compliance with that? Very quickly, this is an overview of what yesterday European Commissioner Olga Tachenko, I'm sorry for this, she published it yesterday at a laboratory consortium group, and she also showed it very nicely in this one. It says, okay, as of 26th of May 2022, Class A non-steriles, all new devices and significant changes to existing devices have to comply to the IVDR. This is really important. Then the in-house exemptions, so that the lab developed tests for Europe, they have to comply already at some part here, but most of the parts as of 26th of May 2024. And then you see the Class Ds have that timeline 2025, Class Cs 26, and Bs in A sterile and equivalents. That's the proposal. Still, it's a proposal. It's not official yet. But it's good to realize what's going on. Now I'm quickly going, because I assume that you know already the IVDR classifications ruling process. Look at Annex 8. In the IVDR, there are the classifications. But here, the MDCG has documents explaining guidances, explaining how to interpret some parts of the regulations. And for IVDs, there are only 3 now there. But look at this one, the 2020-16, it's the guidance on the classification rules for IVDs. This is really key. Also, dedicated ones on COVID and what to do and what's required to have the COVID-19 testing. Because if you look at that MDCG guidance documents, just have a good look at it and see where is my product falling into. But for instance, COVID-19 tests are going from a self-declared product currently for professional use, will go here into the Class Ds in the highest risk class. This is an example. The same is, for instance, the smallpox viruses is now new there as well. So you see a lot of them, some of them were there, but Ebola was also a self-declared product. And currently now it becomes a Class D, the highest risk needing a reference lab and so on. So that's a big thing. But it's good to look at examples, because if you, for instance, Rule 3 is really big, all the sexual transmitted agents are detecting that it's a Class Cs or Class Cs. All the cancer tumor markers, they all become Class Cs. Genetic testing is also Class C. This is the real rule, which is big, leading into the up classification. I just address quickly the timelines, the changes in classification, and as well the designation of the notified bodies. I will give the floor over to Alex now to give more detailed information on what do you have to comply to show performance. And please, if you have questions, address them, because we would like to discuss them a lot. Thanks for this. I will stop sharing and I will, I think I can send it over. The floor is yours then, Alex.
Thank you very much, Anja. I will do my best. Just give me a second to set things up. Okay. There is me chasing after work. slideshow. Are you able? Well, I just assume that everybody's able to see my screen. IVDR, impact of implementation, everything you wanted to know, but were afraid to ask in accordance to the very famous book. I have used some of my slides of another presentation that I gave, so perhaps you will not get everything which is contained in this presentation about the IVDR, but nonetheless a lot of important parts. Just quickly something about myself. As said, I've worked with more than 12 years at Notified Body, Key Quality, which transitioned over to DECRA. I was also a former colleague of Anja, headed the certification management team, both for medical devices as well as IVDs. And on top of that, I was a medical device IVD assessor and Notified Body auditor. Worked at a startup company in the past as a QA/RA manager, and also worked as a product specialist for the sanguine blood transfusion services in Amsterdam. And now currently employed with NAMSA as a consultant. So the things I would like to go over with you are the following topics. What are the basic differences between IVD directive and IVDR? And I will not go over that too much because Anja already explained quite a lot of where we are. But I did, spend some time on slides to at least give you the gist of it. What are the biggest challenges to get compliant with the IVDR? What is post-market surveillance, post-market performance follow-up for IVDR, IVDs in the current IVDR? And what is clinical evidence and performance evaluation for IVDs in the IVDR? So these are the most important elements of my presentations. When there's time, I will also try to squeeze in some misconceptions that we often see and hear from manufacturing dealing with the IVDR project. Now, this is also a recap of another slide that Anja presented. These are the IVDR Key Milestone. And I think it's good to explain a little bit just to show where we started and where we currently are, because the IVDR was published already in May 2017, which is here. And we are now in 2021 and reaching the date of application May 2022, which is already 5 years down the road. And how much we have seen in between. There has been publication of a lot of guidance, a lot of discussions, a lot of back and forth within Europe, because, we like to do that in Europe. And ultimately, understanding that, both the notified bodies as well as the competent authorities were not up to scratch on the full implementation of this new regulation. As of October, a proposal came out. And this, again, I want to emphasize, this is a proposal. This is not the final word. But it does give a nice idea on how this is going to play out. Personally, I do think that this proposal is going to get approved. Whether it's going to be approved in this format, that may be another thing. I think it's good to see that the rollout of the date of application for existing devices under the IVD directive has been smeared out a little bit. So there's more grace period, also depending on the class. So if you have a higher class, the real due date will be 26th of May 2025. Whereas for class A devices placed on the market in a sterile state, this is the 26th of May 2027. And for laboratory developed tests, it may even be pushed out to 26th of May 2028. I think it's good. in the sense that it will give a little bit more time for notified bodies, competent authorities, and manufacturers to adapt. But you will see that a few years, 5 years, 6 years is nothing when it comes down to European regulations and how to comply. If you want to see the actual proposal, I've added a link in the presentation, which is no doubt going to be shared with all of you. Now, let's jump into one of the bigger themes that is covered in the IVD regulation. That is the performance evaluation. And performance evaluation is an evaluation that a manufacturer needs to do themselves as part of the conformity assessment process in order to determine clinical evidence. And what is clinical evidence? I think everybody who's in this space knows a little bit what clinical evidence is, or perhaps know a lot what clinical evidence is. But clinical evidence is also very much defined in the European IVD regulation. And that does not necessarily need to be the same as clinical evidence as perhaps the FDA sees it. Clinical evidence per Article 2 means clinical data and performance evaluation results pertaining to a device of a sufficient amount and quality to allow a qualified assessment of whether the device is safe and achieves the intended clinical benefit when used as intended by the manufacturer. I think it's an important statement because, as noted in yellow, it needs to be of sufficient amount, and it also needs to be of enough quality. It clearly states that the device needs to be safe and achieves the intended clinical benefit when used as intended. That also means that manufacturers cannot just easily compare their device with other devices, which perhaps are not the way as intended as the manufacturers. In order to collect this clinical data and clinical evidence, company needs to carry out a process which is called a performance evaluation. And performance evaluation is perhaps not so new. The way it is carried out within Europe may be perhaps different as it is carried out for PMAs or for 510Ks in the United States. Performance evaluation means an assessment and analysis of data to establish and verify three things: scientific validity of the analyte, the analytical performance of the device, and, where applicable, clinical performance of the device. I think it is important to state that this is where applicable, because the IVDR covers many IVD devices, even specimen containers. And as you probably guess, it is pretty difficult to determine the clinical performance of a specimen container, although it is considered an IVD in the IVDR. The IVDR gives you some leeway to exclude particular requirements. Clinical performance is one of them, but obviously that needs to be duly justified. Another thing you need to keep in mind is that if you gather data, or if you want to develop a strategy for obtaining clinical evidence, the default position the IVDR has is that you shall carry out a clinical performance study unless you are very much in the clear that a clinical performance study is not needed, that you can rely on other sources of clinical evidence and not the other way around. This justification needs to be given also for established devices that are on the market for many years, and perhaps a bit of overkill to determine the scientific validity of analytes, which are in use for many, many years. It is the law and it needs to be respected. So in a nutshell, you need to obtain scientific validity of the analyte, determine analytical performance of the device, and also clinical performance of the assay and analyzer. Need to submit the data in the form of a performance evaluation report. The whole process needs to be carried out in accordance to a performance evaluation procedure and a performance evaluation plan. and the reassessment and filings as needed throughout the product lifecycle when there is a change. If there's going to be a significant change on your device that could impact the clinical performance or the analytical performance, then this could also invoke another performance evaluation review. Now, what we sometimes see, especially for devices that are on the market for many years, have been designed and development way in the past, is that the data has been obtained in a time when these requirements were not there. And so there may be a lack of data. It may be old or outdated data. Instructions for use may contain substantiated claims that you need to review. So especially if you want to move over from the IVD directive to the IVDR, there may be some gaps and that you need to consider. Clinical evidence and performance evaluation is one of the biggest changes in the IVD regulation compared to the IVD directive. The IVD directive basically have a one-pager on performance studies and performance evaluation, and the IVDR has about, 15, 16, 17 pages, depending on the risk class and the approach. Another thing, again, to touch base a little bit on the presentation of Anja earlier, the devil is in the details. So the IVDR is probably much more elaborate than the IVD directive. And it doesn't mean that the basis is still the same. It is still CE marking. It is still a declaration of conformity. There's still a lot of responsibility that lies with the manufacturer. There's still the role of the notified body. However, most of the requirements that were perhaps not written down in the IVD directive, but were acted upon in accordance to guidance documents, have now been bumped up to the regulation as it now is. Clinical evidence, again, the three major inputs, analytical performance in accordance to Annex 13, or the ability of a device to correctly detect or measure a particular analyte. And that's only the detection, the ability of the device to detect an analyte under laboratory conditions and not perhaps under clinical conditions. Because the clinical performance is about the ability of a device to generate results that are correlated with a clinical condition or a physiological or pathological process or state. You can measure a particular antibody against a virus, or you can measure a particular protein in the body and compare that with reference values. But that's still not an assurance that the device will work in the clinical practice. In order to do that, in order to demonstrate that, you also need to demonstrate clinical performance. And the third arm would be the scientific validity, which is also covered in Annex 13, which is the clear association of an analyte with a clinical condition or a physiological state. So if you measure an analyte or an antibody directed to a virus, then it's logical that the existence of that antibody raised against that virus is indicative of a person having contracted a disease, or at least be in contact with that particular virus. But you need to demonstrate that. So demonstrating the relationship between the actual analyte and the clinical condition needs to be established. And for most of the established devices, that can be done by taking a look at literature, also to rely on diagnostic guidance documents that are published in the public domain. But for very new analytes, it may not be so easy to demonstrate, and it may also not be so clear. Also knowing that a lot of tests have been placed on the market without establishing the scientific validity of the analyte, you may sometimes come to surprises. All of that needs to be gathered as clinical evidence. Analytical performance, you typically document in an analytical performance report. Clinical performance, you document in a clinical performance report. Scientific validity in a scientific validity report. And you can collate that together in a performance evaluation report. Now, talking about clinical evidence and technical documentation, the performance evaluation plan is the document that basically describes your performance evaluation process and how that translates to your device. So your performance evaluation plan may look slightly different for an HIV test as opposed to, for instance, a blood glucose monitoring device, because there are different requirements on state of the art. There's a different intended use, there's different diagnostic practice. Sometimes an assay may give a direct result or an indirect result. Sometimes there may be reference values, sometimes not. So all of these details you can further define in your performance evaluation plan. Performance evaluation plan is not necessarily your performance evaluation procedure. The procedure is typically a document that's part of your QMS and will describe the general process, how you obtain clinical evidence. It doesn't tell you much about how you obtain clinical evidence for that specific device. And that's basically where the performance evaluation plan comes in. Again, scientific validity, analytical performance, clinical performance needs to be described. What is your strategy? How do you want to achieve the intended purpose? How you want to demonstrate the intended purpose? That all needs to be defined in your performance evaluation plan. The plan can be quite simple for a simple device, can also be quite complicated for a very new novel device, which may have a lot of functions. Another interesting aspect is the benefit-risk ratio. This is perhaps a new element in the IVD regulation. I think in the United States, we're more used to defining that. The benefit-risk analysis and the benefit-risk ratio is a must-have. The ISO 14971 standard may give you a possibility not to do it when it is clear that the residual risks are above a particular threshold value. However, the IVDR, since its law, it basically does not give any criteria for not doing it. So you need to do it. And for many IVD devices, it may perhaps be a straightforward process, but I don't know if you've ever developed a benefit risk analysis for a cuvette or perhaps a pipette or any other general laboratory use devices. How much is needed? That's one of the questions we get asked the most. And I mean, the intended purpose and intended use really drives that because the more the device is going to be intended, more complicated it is, the more evidence you need to demonstrate. However, how much evidence is needed is not described. What is described in IVD regulation is that it needs to be enough, and it needs to be enough and of good quality to come to a sound assessment, also based on scientific principles. So if you do, for instance, an assessment on literature, is only one article enough? Is two articles enough? Is one clinical performance study enough? It very much depends. And I think to some degree it is good that there is some freedom to establish that. I also think we will get more information coming from Europe through the Medical Device Coordination Group, since they are developing a specific guidance on that topic. The IVDR does not define how much clinical evidence is required. It is the responsibility of you as a manufacturer to define it and also to convince the notified body or even a competent authority for it. So if you don't have a clear strategy and you don't have a very sound approach in collecting clinical data and how to evaluate clinical data, then it is going to be quite a cumbersome process to convince the authorities. Clinical evidence must be appropriate to demonstrate conformity to the relevant general safety and performance requirements. And these are also covered in Annex 1. It's not only covered in Annex 13, also Annex 1, the minimum requirements need to be met. And that needs to be considered in the performance evaluation plan as well. One statement in the article, which is quite interesting: level of clinical evidence shall be appropriate in view of the characteristics of a device and its intended purpose. So in order to determine the level of clinical evidence, you need to determine what a device is, what the characteristics it has, what kind of risks are involved, what kind of benefit it gives. And the risk versus benefit is also very much, again, driven by its intended purpose. The level of clinical evidence will always vary among IVDs and risk class. It doesn't automatically mean, by the way, that if you have a class B device, you would need to have less evidence than, for instance, a class D device. Let's say you would have a very novel new device, which is classified as class B, that may perhaps require more clinical evidence because it's new and in the eyes of Europe, more risky than, for instance, an established class D device. So it's not that always so black and white. Use your common sense. Risk class and clinical performance are linked. Clinical performance using a risk-based approach is very sound. More risk in general means more evidence. Now, if you have started up your performance evaluation plan, and if you have a strategy on how to obtain clinical data, what are you going to do with that? Well, you need to evaluate that. You need to evaluate that against established criteria, which are also defined in your performance evaluation plan, and you need to gather evidence. And as said before, the default position is thou shalt carry out a clinical performance study unless you think there is other clinical data. And the sources of evidence are typically published literature, expert opinions, similar devices, proof of concept studies, analytical performance studies, and experience through routine testing. And also clinical performance studies. These are all examples that you can use to gather data in accordance to your established criteria and weigh them and come to a conclusion in your performance evaluation report. And by the way, the content of both the performance evaluation plan and the performance evaluation report are both spelled out in the IVDR. Now, another new topic that, or perhaps not, that I wish to discuss is post-market surveillance versus performance evaluation. Now, everything I just discussed is as if the device has not been placed on the market. And for the majority of devices or device manufacturers, that's a bit of a catch-22 because these devices are already on the market. So in what degree can you consider that as pre-market? Well, let's just say that if you already have devices on the market and you have already gathered data through your post-market surveillance system under the IVD directive, then you are lucky and you can use that in your benefit in doing your performance evaluation. In general, it is that with performance evaluation, there is very limited market data. You need to make assumptions. Same as when you for the first time you make a risk analysis, you cannot really determine the risk unless you have checked them with actual post-market surveillance data. So performance evaluation will lead to a performance evaluation report. If there are particular question marks or unknowns, then you can use your post-market surveillance system and your post-market performance follow-up to give answers to these question marks. Post-market performance follow-up is basically the process that will narrow down your focus on getting clinical evidence, additional clinical evidence on your device after it's placed on the market. And you need to do that to, again, update your performance evaluation. I think I have 2 slides to go. So if Kristen is okay with that, let me wrap that up a little bit. If you are working on legacy devices, it is good that you know, the IVD directive and the IVDR are in very many ways the same. And so don't throw out the baby together with the bathwater, so to speak. Take a look at what kind of data you currently have, do a gap analysis, do an assessment on data integrity. And if you know the data is sound in accordance to your own criteria, then you can certainly take that on board in order to demonstrate compliance with the IVDR. Things to consider is what is current state of the art. State of the art is not what it was 20 years ago. What is the intended use today? What can you expect? Are there any design changes that come up that you still want to do under the directive or under the IVDR? Have claims changed over time? Changed claims in the intended instructions for use or in the labeling? How is that now supported? Perhaps you need to limit claims because you don't have the evidence. The state of the art of the device should be reviewed in today's usage and not when it was first introduced into the market. So you better do a determination of that. My final slide for today, optimal approach. In case you are still in the IVD directive and you want to move over to the IVDR, the best way to do is do a gap analysis and take a look at what you currently have. What do you have in your risk management file? What do you have in your technical dossier? Instructions for use, labeling, DHF, and determine what the gaps are. And the gaps are mostly in quality management system on one hand, or the technical documentation, clinical documentation in the other. And if there are gaps in your QMS, no doubt there are, then you need to set up a process change plan and introduce the changes in your QMS system, post-market surveillance system, and vigilance system. And if there's gaps in the performance evaluation of clinical evidence, you need to set up your performance evaluation plan and work your way through the elements as just discussed. And on top of that, you also need to gather data on the technical dossier and GSPR. When you have established that, on top of that, you need to determine your post-market performance follow-up plan and together with your PMS plan and roll that out. By the way, it is not necessary to already create a post-market surveillance report. You can start with a plan. However, this also depends very much whether you have placed your device on the market or not under the IVD directive. Because if that's the case, then you have already needed to start. And the transitional requirements in Article 100 of the IVD regulation will state that the new requirements of the IVDR will now also apply to your existing devices. This was my presentation. I hope it was clear and I didn't overwhelm you too much. In case you have any further questions, this is the commercial break for NAMSA, and feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Anya and Alex, for your insights into IVDR. I think we have a few minutes to dive deeper in with some questions from the audience. For the audience, I have both the Q&A window open and the chat, and I have seen a question come into the chat, so we can start there. And maybe, Anya, you can field this question. The question is, do you need to have your ISO 13485 audit performed by a notified body, or can it be done by an accredited body? And I want to add on to that. Could you explain more after that about the relationship between the ISO 13485 and the IVDR?
Yes. The IVDR is product certification, and you have to comply to proper functioning QMS, and you have your technical file have to be up to date, state of the art. In Article 10.8, it's clearly describing what you have to have in your QMS. And if there are potential European harmonized standards available, then you should, or you may claim compliance with it. That means IVDR is leading for product certification. ISO 13485 is not required. However, the notified bodies designated for IVDR, they will do the audit also taking into account ISO 13485. So once ISO 13485 does not give you your CE marking, your CE process. So if you have an ISO 13485 with a non-accredited body, that's possible, but you still have to get your notified body in, and they will do an Annex 9 audit, and they will look at ISO 13485, and it's the same amount or even more amount of time they're in, and they will check if you are fully in compliance with the Annex 9 of the IVDR. So it's well, let's say it's smart to have your ISO 134 auditors or designators also being the notified bodies. So that's also what you saw happening is when Lloyd's and UL fell off because of UK, they are not going into the IVDR. All the manufacturers who had only an ISO 13485 already starting to transfer to those organizations, to a BSI Netherlands or a TÜV Süd or a DECRA, because they know, okay, they are going into the IVDR, and then we can do the combination of ISO 13485 together with the IVDR. If you're not using an accredited organization for ISO 13485, then the quality is, what we see is lower, is less, because the accrediting organizations are focusing, are really controlling also the auditing organizations of the ISO 13485. Advice is try to combine them, because otherwise you have both ISO auditors in there and the notified bodies will do the same again.
Yeah, I can think of two main advantages. First of all, if you haven't, come across a notified body in the past and you need to set up your ISO 13485, a nice way to get a foot in the door with a notified body is to already have your quality management system certified against that particular standard. And then a year after that or 2 years after that, when all the documentation is ready, you can then more easily transition over into ISO 13485. So yes. Into the IVDR.
Yeah, that's what's happening. You saw that everybody was transferring to those notified bodies who are going into the IVDR process, who will take it over, because then they already know the QMS system of the manufacturer. But there's a lot more to add on to comply with the IVDR QMS requirements. It's not ISO 13485 is not immediately also IVDR QMS requirements.
And many times the notified body will redo your ISO 13485 while they do the IVDR notified body. So, I mean, also from time perspective, you're not going to be getting a lot of advantage of that. So.
Great, thank you. See another question coming in, so I'll ask one of my own. If there are companies out there who have not been able to schedule their IVDR audit in time for the date of application, do you recommend, or is it expected, I would say, that they are following the IVDR post-market surveillance as of that date, even for their CE IVDD marked products?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that was.
When the corrigendum is,
I want to make sure.
Yeah, and when the corrigendum is there, yeah, then you still have to comply with your post-market surveillance. Then, of course, it depends on who is your ISO 134 organization, but officially they should be trained also for IVDR requirements, because ISO 13485 is stating all regulatory requirements. So they also should know that they will look at post-market surveillance. And we see that already now with MDR. You see that with MDR, you have a soft transition as well. However, last year, 26th of May, 2021, the post-market surveillance requirements are now in there, and there's a lot of non-conformities based on those parts which are not fully addressed then.
Yeah.
Agree?
very much. The proposal doesn't affect the requirements for post-market surveillance. And I mean, that's something you need to do anyway.
Wonderful.
They
That
will
is
look
our
at post-market surveillance plans. They will look at SIRS. They will look at all those requirements, the PRCs. Yeah, sorry about that.
Wonderful. I want to thank the audience and Anya and Alex. Thank you so much for your insights. This is a really helpful panel. And thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice day.
You
Have
too.
a nice event
Bye.
and have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.